Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino? Blimey.
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting his front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich, don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as a family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. As an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the Magpie, which is much bigger, every springtime,
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you for your company this Saturday morning between now and 12:30. There's a lot happening. It's a very much busier Saturday than usual because Parliament has been recalled on a Saturday for the first time since the war in Afghanistan in 2001. Hasn't happened very often. In fact, we're talking about that and how rare it is a little bit later on with a parliamentary and constitutional historian. But we have an MP in the studio who has been recalled, Andrew Rossendale, and we'll talk to him in a second. And we're asking you the question, why should we save British steel? This is going to cost hundreds of millions, possibly billions of pounds of your money. Is it a decision you're happy with? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We're also talking about quite a number of other issues today, including whether a trade deal with the US can come in time. A woman who's been arrested for taking an iPad off her daughter. Yes, really. Should 16-year-olds get the vote as well? Keir Starmer said this week it's a manifesto commitment. It's going to happen. We're speaking to a 16-year-old about that who thinks it should happen, and indeed Claire Muldoon, one of our most popular contributors, who says it shouldn't. We'll ask you your thoughts as well. We're also talking about China shutting down trade with the US in riposte to Trump. Lots happening there, including talks with Iran as well. That is what America is doing. We'll talk to an expert about that. And we'll go live to Parliament at 11 o'clock in an hour's time. Keir Starmer will be on his feet and he will be putting the case to Parliament about essentially nationalising, not quite, but essentially nationalising British steel. What about Port Talbot as well? Weren't they just left to float in the wind? Why is Scunthorpe so important? We'll talk about that. And listen, if you're in Scunthorpe, if you're in Port Talbot, wherever you are in the UK or around the world, we want to hear from you because this is my show, but it's your show too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, or you can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. Tech Up Dave listens to them all and we'll play out as many as we can. Keep them to less than a minute please. Those voice messages, you can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on on the main number 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 12:30. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, yesterday gave a short statement where he talked about the need, in his view, to recall Parliament to get some of those MPs back off their Easter breaks. He also talked about the plan to give Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, effective control over British Steel in Scunthorpe. This is what the Prime Minister had to say.
Good afternoon. As Prime Minister, I will always act in the national interest to protect British jobs and British workers. This afternoon, the future of British Steel hangs in the balance. Jobs, investment, growth. Our economic and national security are all on the line. I've been to Scunthorpe. I met the steel workers. I know how important steel is, not just to the region, but to the whole country. It's part of our national story, part of the pride and heritage of this nation. And I'll tell you this, it is essential for our future. Our plan for change means we need more steel, not less. So we will act with urgency. Now, we should be clear, this situation and our response is unique. While it is true that we're facing a new era of global instability, our concerns about this plant and negotiations to protect it have been running for years. This moment could have happened at any time, but it has happened now, and I will not stand by. There is no time to waste. So we are recalling Parliament tomorrow for a Saturday sitting. We will pass emergency legislation in one day to give the Business Secretary the powers to do everything possible to stop the closure of these blast furnaces. And as I have said, we will keep all options on the table. Our future is in our hands. This government will not sit back and just hope. We will act to secure Britain's future with British steel, made in Britain, in the national interest.
That was the Prime Minister speaking yesterday, talking about recalling Parliament today. We'll go down there live at 11 o'clock and bring you a flavour of what is going on. We're not going to play the whole thing, obviously, but we'll play you bits and pieces. Well, you may remember this week I did quite a controversial interview with a barrister who is representing Hamas. He said I might be getting a call from the police. So far, that hasn't happened. I dared to ask him a question he didn't like, and that hasn't happened. The Rozzers have not arrived, but the Rozzer has. Andrew Rossendale is live in studio. Seamless link there. Andrew, thank you so much. Andrew Rossendale is a Conservative MP for Romford and also a shadow Foreign Minister. Andrew, were you surprised to be recalled this week?
Yes, because what we are debating today could have been dealt with at any time. The government surely knew that this was a crisis waiting to happen, and we could have debated this earlier in the week. We had Monday and Tuesday where we were sitting, where we simply had topical debates to talk about. So they could have raised this earlier. They've left it why till this weekend and recalling Parliament at great expense when they knew this was coming down the line. Why didn't they deal with it earlier?
Is it a bit like Pam in Gavin and Stacey? Does he just love the drama, or why is he doing it now, do you think?
Look, Peter, I just watched the very robotic scripted speech that the Prime Minister's given on this topic. It seems to me like it's all planned. The government wants to look like they're being tough and very determined to put the national interest first. If they were really determined to put the national interest first, they would dump their extreme net zero policies, because this is what lies behind a lot of the problems we're facing today. And certainly with what's happening with British Steel, net zero is part of the story behind it. And so the government's policies are absolutely being made on the hoof. They don't seem to have a clear vision for this country. And I'm very concerned that we have a government that isn't putting the national interest first, despite what the Prime Minister's trying to claim.
Although they would argue that actually this was, and in fact did in that clip we saw from the Prime Minister, that there is a huge amount of controversy about this, that this has been a big issue for a long time, and that the Conservatives should have dealt with this during their 14 years in power. What would you say to that, Andrew?
Well, of course, the Conservatives should have done a lot of things in their 14 years in power, and I agree with that general principle that We did have 14 years and we could have resolved a lot of issues. But to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, she, as Trade Secretary, negotiated a plan for this and she had the foresight to do so. Labour's ditched that and they've been negotiating something else which hasn't worked.
What was her plan and why did the government ditch it? Just take us through that.
Well, I don't understand. You have to ask the government why they ditched it. What I do know is that Kemi Badenoch, as Trade Secretary, was on top of this and she negotiated a plan which would have kept steel going in this context, but it has fallen apart. Why? You'll have to ask government ministers. They're in charge. They're making the decisions. What I do know is that it's now a national security matter.
Why is it a national security matter?
Well, because we depend on steel. We can't be the only G7 country that cannot produce its own steel.
But answer that question for me today. Well, we're asking our viewers and listeners, why should we save British steel? Perhaps you can just outline the case, just explain it to people who may just be thinking, hold on a second, hundreds of millions of pounds, possibly billions of taxpayers' money. They didn't save Port Talbot. Why Scunthorpe? Just outline the case for, if you would.
Again, I don't know why the government didn't intervene on Port Talbot. I can only guess that Port Talbot was first and they decided not to do anything, and now they realise that if Scunthorpe goes, that's the end. There's no British steel anymore. So it's a rearguard action just to save something, because without British steel, without the ability of the UK to provide its own steel, because of the global insecurities that we now face, it's a very dangerous situation. We need steel to produce all kinds of things that we need to make in this country. Without that, we're putting ourselves at risk, and it means we're dependent on other countries, and we don't want to be dependent on other countries at a time like this. So I think the government's right to act. We're right to ensure that for national security reasons, steel is still manufactured within these islands. But what they're going to do, we don't know, because we've not seen a bill published yet. I guess it's got to have to be before 11 o'clock. We don't know whether they're really nationalising it, and we don't know quite what they mean by keeping steel going in Scunthorpe. Are they nationalising it? Are they just... I don't know what they're doing.
They are saying
Government
anyway...
needs to explain.
What we've been told, certainly, is that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, or whoever the business secretary happens to be, would have power to essentially direct the company, and that the Chinese owners would not have the power over that company. So, sorry, go ahead.
It sounds like it's effectively they are nationalising it.
It's pretty clear.
By any other name, that's what it sounds like.
It's interesting. There is YouGov has done a quick poll on this. The polling company has polled 5,046 adults in Great Britain, asking, would you support or oppose the government nationalising British steel? And 57% either strongly supported or somewhat supported the idea. Only 9% opposing in any way, either somewhat opposing or strongly opposing. A third of people saying they don't know, and that's fair enough. Are you surprised at those figures at all, or do you think that's very much in line with what your constituents have been telling you in Romford?
Not really. I think in these circumstances, I'm not somebody that believes in nationalisation generally. I believe that things should generally, industry belongs in the private sector. But if there's a national concern here, if it's for national security, which I think this really can be said that it is, then there's a reason to return it back to control of government. But it's not a panacea. All this idea that put it into the public ownership, that's going to make everything work perfectly and it's going to make it a profitable company. Well, I remember the 70s when things were 70s and 80s when things were nationalised, and they were a dog's breakfast. They didn't work.
Although the Conservatives aren't going to oppose this bill today, really, are they?
Of course not, because we are basically going to lose our steel industry completely if we don't take some action now. So the government will get the support from the opposition today to carry out the measures that they are putting forward, but we don't really know what their plan is.
Yeah. Can I ask you about something else, which is related to steel, absolutely. It's also related to the United States, because in the coming days, we're told the United States and the UK will have some sort of trade deal. Do you think that's accurate or a bit of spin?
So. Should have happened a few years ago, really, in Donald Trump's first term. Under Theresa May, he wanted to have a trade agreement with us. And of course, there's too much fudging going on over Brexit at the time, which meant that we couldn't seize that opportunity. So that was a big mistake. But I really hope that because of what's now happening, despite the government itself not being particularly keen on Brexit, it's giving us, the United Kingdom, an incredible opportunity to do trade deals with the United States, but other countries fast. And so we should. I don't like the idea of tariffs, and none of us think that in the end tariffs is a good thing because it will make everybody poorer. But it's sort of forcing us to hurry up with what is a fair trade agreement between both the United States and the United Kingdom. So I hope the government will seize this opportunity, because we know that Donald Trump is pro-British. We know instinctively he wants to work with us. Is he though?
I mean, if you're pro-British, why are you slapping 10% tariff? And also, interestingly, we were told by the White House that if there is, if we behave ourselves, essentially, if we don't put reciprocal tariffs on, well, then we'll be rewarded. The EU thought about it, didn't do it. Now they're in the same position as we were, whereas previously the EU had 20% tariffs, we had 10% tariffs. Some would argue special relationship means nothing in that regard anyway.
Well, I think there is truth in that, although we did have that Brexit advantage for those few days when it was 25% for the EU and 10% for us. But he's levelled it all down to 10%. But the truth is that, and I can understand this, the United States feels that it's been hard done by other countries who are taking advantage with this trade imbalance, and as Donald Trump himself has said, they've been the piggy bank for so many things. I think Donald Trump was elected to put America first, and that's what he's doing.
And he's doing that.
He's doing that, exactly. Yeah. And I think we need a government that puts the United Kingdom first.
Andrew, thank you, and thanks for coming on a Saturday. It's a momentous and busy Saturday. The Prime Minister has just left Downing Street for Parliament. It's just up the road. It's literally a quarter of a mile, third of a mile, something like that, up to Parliament, and the Prime Minister's got in his car and gone there. We're asking you, why should we save British steel? Let me know your thoughts on this. 0344 499 1000. Do you have the steely resolve that Keir Starmer at least says he does? Lots of people getting in touch, including Keith in Durham, not too far from Scunthorpe. He says Scunthorpe is currently losing £700,000 a day, and Starmer wants to take over the running of it. This is sheer folly, as it will cost us taxpayers a fortune in order to save around 3,000 jobs, most of which will be Labour voters. Leslie says, is Jonathan Reynolds qualified to be overseeing the steel deal? Jane says, if I have it correct, Parliament has been recalled so they can pass emergency legislation to give Jonathan Reynolds the authority to sort the Scunthorpe steel, something that should have happened long before today. How much will today cost opening up Westminster? Some say Reynolds should have been sacked. Actually, on that note, Andrew Rossendale, I know MPs coming back, I know not all of them will, but they can reclaim the money, can't they, to come off foreign holidays and things if Parliament's recalled?
Yes, so we are in Easter recess at the moment, and a lot of MPs will clearly be away on holidays. They would have travelled to see their families, and obviously if Parliament's suddenly recalled without notice, they are entitled to claim travel back to Westminster. So if they are on foreign holidays and they feel that they should be back in Westminster, they're entitled, obviously, to claim their travel expenses. I think that's perfectly reasonable. However, my understanding is that there is unlikely to be any votes today. Not every MP can stand up and speak on this topic. There's 650 of us, so we're not all going to be able to be there to speak. So it's not absolutely essential that every MP is there. If there was going to be a division, if there was going to be an argument and a vote on something, then yes, there would have been a three-line whip and every MP would be there. But I suspect today that the MPs that are most concerned over this issue or have most involvement with it, particularly those from Lincolnshire and the surrounding areas where Scunthorpe is located, they're the MPs that are going to want to be there to make sure their constituents are represented in the interests of the local area is supported.
Andrew, thank you. Andrew Rossendale, Shadow Foreign Minister, Conservative MP for Romford. And Dorian has been in touch as well. He says, I don't have a problem with saving British steel, but with the caveat of getting rid of net zero, becoming self-sufficient in energy through fracking and North Sea oil. Graham says, Labour are already in the steel business as they've stolen from us following the budget by Rachel from Accounts, the views of Graham. And we're asking you, why should we save British steel? Are you part of the 57% of people who think we should? Maybe you're not. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll go to our debate desk in just a minute. We've got a brand new panellist for you. You're going to love him. Stay with us here on Talk.
there are a lot of extra charges, and the one thing you mentioned earlier on, which I totally agree with, is the state of our roads. Not the main highways, which are run by the government, by the Highways Agency, Highways England now, or National Highways, I think it's called, keeps changing its name. But the local roads are an absolute disgrace in this country. You go to France, and the roads are perfect. They're flat as a pancake. Over here, you have to watch where you're driving because there are so many potholes around. So there's a real case to get more money into local authorities to get the roads sorted out. That's perfectly true.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of people getting in touch. I've just had a quick look at Twitter there over the break, and Vivek has been in touch to say the lack of industrial capability was brutally exposed during COVID. We couldn't make masks, gowns, ventilators, etc., and became dependent upon China. We've become a service-led economy, which isn't good for our security and prosperity. Well, interesting one, Vivek. I agree with you, but I'd maybe challenge you slightly on that because our economy is so service-based, actually the tariffs are not having nearly the impact they would have if we were a very manufacturing-focused economy. So I wonder what you think about that. Tweet me again, and if I see it, which I hopefully will before the end of the programme, I will read it out, Vivek, but thank you for that. AJ says, so let me get this right. Starmer and Reynolds, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, want the British taxpayer to pour in billions to save the Chinese from a much needed financial haircut. The front bench know nothing of running a profitable business without dropping eco-cultism. No steelmaking is viable anywhere on the planet. Net zero equals zero profit. That's AJ in Lancashire there, so not too far away from Scunthorpe. Brexit Duck says, I love some of these names, the recall of Parliament is the classic dead cat manoeuvre to take the heat away from the rape gang disgrace. It is totally predictable. And Neil Price says, I'd rather save the steel industry than send billions to Ukraine. Robert says, ask your MP guest where they were when Port Talbot closed, and even more job losses than Scunthorpe. Nobody was recalled then. It's not British steel, it's just a logo. It's Chinese steel. They own it the same. And Port Talbot, of course, was Indian. And thanks as well to, finally, to Lynn, who says, I normally watch you, Peter, but I'm afraid this week you lost out to Rory McIlroy and the golf. Why are people so nasty? Very, very interesting point. Jane has also sent a nice message. Quite a few people getting in touch about the interview I did with Frank McGuinness this week on Thursday. And all I would say is thank you. And secondly, if you want to watch it in full, Frank McGuinness was, of course, the barrister who is representing Hamas. I asked him some tough questions. He wasn't massively happy with it. A lot of people have seen it. It is on YouTube if you want to have a look at it. It's also on my Twitter at Peter Cardwell. But back to British Steel, and YouGov, the polling company, has done a quick poll of 5,000 odd people. Would you support or oppose the government nationalising British Steel? And 57% of people strongly support or somewhat support the idea. That's what they'll be debating in Parliament in just over half an hour's time. The Prime Minister has left for the Houses of Parliament, and we're asking you the question, not just the MPs but you as well. Why should we save British Steel? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. I want to go now to our debate desk. Luke Gitos is with us. He's a lawyer and a writer, and Simeon Lee is a policy analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance. You might remember Simeon from a few weeks ago. As soon as we had him on, I thought, get that guy on the debate desk. So Simeon and Luke are with us this morning. Simeon, should we save British Steel?
Well, I think first we ought to look at the fundamentals of why British Steel is in such dire straits. Part of this has to do with energy policy, failed energy policy from this government, excessive regulation on energy, excessive tax on energy, climate agenda. That has led to one of the highest industrial energy prices in the world in the UK. That's 60% higher than France. Now, obviously, if you're going to run a steel business and you're paying 60% more for energy than your closest competitors, that's going to make it very, very hard to run a profitable business. There's also issues with the planning system that stifles construction demand, because steel is a major input in construction, and so a planning system where it takes years and years and years to get things built, that's going to make it very difficult for industries to plan ahead. Also, tax rises on business from this government. We see a tax on employers, the national insurance rise to 15%. We see taxes on capital gains and other investment. That's going to depress business demand. That's going to make it harder for British Steel and any other business in this country, frankly, that uses steel as an input to run their business profitably. And that will come together and make make it very difficult to run British Steel. Now, whether or not the solution to this problem is nationalisation, whether it's a bailout or whether it's a commercial solution where we find another buyer for British Steel, we have to solve these fundamental problems if we want a viable steel industry. Because if not, we're going to be back here, right back in the exact same position 5 years down the line. This has already happened before, right? British Steel was first sold in 2016 for £1 to a private equity firm because it was so unprofitable. And then 5 years later, in 2020, that was sold again to, was liquidated, in fact, to this Chinese firm that now owns it. And who's to say if we don't solve these fundamental problems, in 2030, we're not going to be in the exact same position. But instead of private money being spent on this unprofitable enterprise, it's going to be taxpayer money that's being spent. And so the government really has to solve the fundamental problem of why British Steel isn't profitable before we come and talk about what should be done exactly in terms of nationalisation or bailout or commercial solution.
What do you think, Luke?
Well, I don't think there's any way around saving British Steel. I think most people might not realise that it's a major part of our infrastructure. Without the ability to make virgin steel, which is what these plants produce, we are unable to produce weaponry, important weaponry needed for the military. It's a huge part of our transport infrastructure. It is part of our railway network. And all of this means that we become increasingly dependent on foreign business. And I think for most people that will be intuitively uncomfortable. It's worth going back and reading the decarbonisation policy that British Steel put out only in 2023.
He's still my beating heart.
I know. I know. I mean, it's exciting Saturday morning reading.
Yeah, you've read it, so we don't have to. What does it say?
The reason it was quite as interesting as it was because it seems as though they're in this sunny uplands. They're saying, over the next few years, we're involved in this amazing decarbonisation programme that's going to bring masses of new green jobs to the area. It's going to be a huge revolution in the way that we produce steel, and it's going to allow us to meet our net zero goals. But buried in that announcement was discussion from the CEO, who actually said this is going to be enormously challenging to meet our net zero targets within the time frame that's anticipated by the UK government. Is going to be a real challenge because it involved introducing what were, I'm perhaps gone into a bit too much detail here, but these environmentally friendly furnaces that they wanted to introduce, which have now formed a major part of the negotiations with the government.
There's something, some sort of arch.
Yeah, arc. Yeah,
arc.
I did look up I've scribbled.
Electric arc.
Yeah, electric arc furnaces.
Yes, okay.
And basically they don't make virgin steel. They melt down existing steel and effectively reconstitute it, as far as I can tell. And they're just not as effective as the normal blast furnaces that are at Scunthorpe at the moment. And the idea that you could both decarbonise and create a profitable enterprise has been shown to be for the birds. And I think this is the major problem at the heart of net zero, which is that whenever it comes up against the reality of solving a real practical problem, it comes up short. This government has presented one singular vision for the future of the steel industry, and that's green steel. And when you have that kind of singular focus, you end up in this really disastrous situation where, on the one hand, Ed Miliband is banning the production of new coal in the UK only months ago, to then be going around the world asking other countries to sell us more coal to keep these furnaces on. I think most people would find that situation completely irrational. So we do need to take a serious look at the way that net zero is influencing the development of energy policy in this country. And I think until we do that, British Steel is just going to be one part of a much bigger problem.
Okay, what do you think about this? And what do you think about the government's handling of this? We're going to go live to Parliament in about half an hour's time, but let us know what you think in the meantime. 0344 499 1000. Maybe you want to say Keir Starmer's steely resolve is marvellous, or maybe you want to slag him off. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll be back in the debate desk with Simeon and Luke in just a minute.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Shimmy and Lee and Luke Geddes are with me here on the debate desk. Great to have them in the studio. Elif has given me a ring from South Wales, 0344 499 1000. First caller of the show today. Elif, what do you make of what the government is doing here?
Very good morning to you, Peter, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Good to talk to you.
I'm absolutely appalled about the way the country has been run on many fronts and subjects. But this is something that has been an underlying problem, not only today with the steelworks that exist and still surviving just about, but this has been going on since the 80s and the 90s. I don't know if you knew this, Peter, but this is where I am, South Wales, in Ebervale. We had the biggest steelworks in the world.
Port Talbot?
No,
different steelworks?
Ebervale Steelworks.
Ebervale, sorry, my Welsh geography is appalling. Apologies, Elif. And that wasn't saved, clearly.
It was the biggest steelworks in Britain, in the world. There was no emergency parliament called to save that. It was sold off to a company called Chorus. I think they were a Dutch company. And we produced for everybody. So we were self-sufficient. And in an event of any national emergency, we had them to be able to rely on. But the other thing is, Peter, that I'd like to comment on is that the government now, that, that's not their fault. They've inherited that. But the culture of being, make a quick buck, close it down or sell it off, and forget about the future.
So should we as taxpayers have to pick up the tab? Because the question we're asking today is, why should we save British Steel? I mean, do you think it's an important thing to save? Obviously, there are 3,000 jobs in Scunthorpe, many more lost in Wales over the years, as you correctly point out there. But should it be up to us as the taxpayer to do that, Elif?
Well, at the end of the day, Peter, going into history as well with our steelworks, I don't know if you knew this, but we had a mine next door to the steelworks, so not with raw material. We had all that on the doorstep of the steelworks. They invested billions to keep that pit open, and they ended up closing that pit with all brand new machinery being buried there. Now, in relation to the situation with the steelworks in England, I was listening to news reports that they suggesting importing coal from Japan.
Yeah. Well, listen, and that's a big issue as well. That is a big issue as well, Elif, and thank you for your call. Liz has been in touch on that exact point, actually, and says, I'm afraid the debate on British Steel is just performative unless we use our own coal. Relying on another country's coal will keep us just as vulnerable as we are now. Carol in Shoreham by Sea says, morning, Peter. Watching Starmer's speech is making me so angry. Complete and utter shameless lying. What about Port Talbot? They are clueless. And Elif saying there essentially, what about us? And this is the sort of last chance saloon for British Steel. Just a final thought on this issue, Luke.
You can't build an economy entirely around services in the City of London, and I think that's the myth that a lot of government after government have been proceeding on. These were long-standing British industries. They were becoming less competitive on the global market, but they weren't unsalvageable. We do now need to have a serious look at the way that our economy is structured, think about what we can make in an increasingly competitive world, and how we support those industries through central government and through competitive policy. I just think that, Elif's right, that these industries have suffered under economic short-termism. In other words, we've made absolutely no plan for our energy independence or our economic independence, and as a result we have an economy at the moment that's completely flatlining in terms of its productivity. We seem to celebrate very small increases in growth as though they are historic wins, when in fact, we are in a process of managed decline in our economy at the moment.
Do you think it's managed decline in our economy, Shimian?
Well, I think that it's not sustainable for the taxpayers to be funding to be propping up essentially unprofitable businesses in the long term. I mean, the role of government is not to directly run business, it's to create the conditions in which business can thrive. So I think this conversation about whether or not we should save British Steel is a bit of a non sequitur, because what we should be doing is talking about how can we create the conditions for businesses to thrive.
Isn't that a secondary question? Dave in South Gloucester has been in touch and says there's no question we should nationalise British Steel. Relying on foreign suppliers, especially hostile states, for the steel needed for defence would be a senseless and idiotic policy. If we get into a dispute with such a country, then they could immediately damage our defence capability by cutting off supply. This goes beyond the free market, doesn't it, Simeon?
Well, I agree that there certainly is some argument for retaining some domestic steel production capacity, but whether or not that necessarily means a state-run industry is a different question. Because I think when you start coming into state-run industries, you're going down a very slippery slope. I mean, look at how the state has managed projects like HS2, for example, which is like billions of pounds over budget.
Sorry, was that not a roaring success, HS2? Did I mix that up? Oh no, that's right. It was a complete disaster. Sorry, yes, Simeon, apologies.
So the fact that the state finds it very difficult to actually manage projects in a financially efficient way should give us pause when we talk about nationalisation. I mean, if we talk about security concerns, the defence sector, for example, the UK has a very strong defence sector, and that is a privately run sort of part of the private sector, and so it's not the case that we necessarily need a state-run steel industry in the same way we don't need a state-run defence sector. Once again, what we need to do is make the steel industry viable, and that starts from government policy on energy, that starts from government policy on taxes, that starts from government policy on planning, for example. If we talk about the role of government, that's a very interesting question, because we cannot expect the government taxpayers, in fact, to prop up these failing businesses. I mean, in this upcoming year, I think 13,000 high street stores are set to close. The solution to that isn't to have the government run and take over these 13,000 high street stores. It's to create conditions in which businesses can thrive, and that's true of the steel industry as well.
From blast furnaces to bin fires, lots of people burning their rubbish in Birmingham. Union bosses are apparently holding up the bin deal, fighting amongst themselves over a £42 million court case. Also, you'll be delighted to hear that Joanne Roney, who is the managing director of Birmingham City Council, has taken a business trip to Cannes in the south of France at the onset of a major bin strike crisis. You may remember that one of the Birmingham MPs, who's actually chairman of the Business and Trade Committee, Liam Byrne, who was so popular as Chief Secretary to the Treasury that his nickname was Voldemort, he went off to Japan. So isn't it nice that these people can all have a nice holiday away from the smelly bins, Simeon?
Well, I think it's an absolute disgrace what's going on in Birmingham. I mean, the fact that they are failing to deliver these basic services is frankly an embarrassment.
Completely agree.
And who's getting the short end of the stick here? It's taxpayers. Taxpayers in Birmingham especially, they've just received, they're going to be paying 7.5% more council tax this year. That's up from 10% increase last year. And in fact, they're getting less services for what they're paying. And the blame for this fully lies with, I think, the council. And this is a council that previously effectively declared bankruptcy with their Section 114 notice. The government sent a bunch of commissioners in there, and they found, huge cultural problems that go beyond just the financial failures that they've had.
Luke, what's your perspective on this?
Well, of course, Unite have a role to play in this as well, and it's clear that the union are involved in a legal dispute with Birmingham Council that seems to be rumbling on. Birmingham Council blaming factional infighting within the leadership of Unite, which I don't think is completely unbelievable. It certainly doesn't stretch the bounds of possibility.
Indeed.
So I think both parties here blame to take at least some of the blame. But I think Simeon's right. It's a complete outrage when a local council can't fulfil its basic functions when they're taking tax revenue in order to do it. I think this needs to be resolved as soon as possible. And I do worry about the role of the courts in all of this, and the role that litigation comes to play, because often when these very significant court cases unfold between public bodies and institutions like Unite, it can lead to huge expenditure on things that are totally unnecessary and totally outside of the interests of the paying public. Lord knows how much this case is costing.
And taxpayers' money, the council tax rises that Simeon's talking about, that 7.2%?
7.5%.
7.5%, that rise for the people in Birmingham. I mean, the first duty, they say the first duty of government is to keep its people safe. I mean, the first duty of a council is to collect the bins.
Yeah, 100%. And I've experienced this in my own area where, I think bin collection and the failure to properly manage litter can have a hugely detrimental impact on people's experience of their local area. I think it generates genuine discomfort but also generates a sense that people don't really care about the area. Now,
totally.
that's not the fault of the people of Birmingham, obviously.
Of course not.
They're now in the position where they're having to physically take the bins to the
some of them
dumps
are
themselves.
burning, you know, toxic plastic and so on. If you're in Birmingham and you want to talk about this, or maybe you have an opinion elsewhere in the country as well, let us know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll take more calls, of course, between now and 12:30. We'll take voice notes as well if you want to send those in via WhatsApp. It's dead easy. Just send a voice note same way as you would send it to anybody else via WhatsApp. 0344 499 1000. It's a product nobody wants to buy. This is British Steel and make it economical, so it's done. Pull the plug and stop wasting more money, says this texter. Terry and Slough says anyone with an ounce of common sense knows this idiotic rush to net zero will be disastrous for this country. Unfortunately, there seems to be a lack of common sense in this useless and incompetent Labour government. We're going live to Parliament, I should say, in about 20 minutes time. We'll hear from Keir Starmer. Amanda says, what a pity Starmer puts steel above the safety of our children from rape gangs. Anything to detract attention from the deliberate cover-up, she says. Stuart says, I'm puzzled because whilst I'm all for saving British Steel, I thought they'd already sacrificed Scunthorpe on the altar of net zero. Scunthorpe makes virgin steel, and I last heard we'd only be producing recycled steel. Well, yes, there is, as Luke Gittos was talking about there a bit earlier on, this idea of these arches, this different form, not a blast furnace, but another way of producing steel, but it's essentially recycling. Mark and Selby says you cannot have it both ways, and that an under 17-year-old is classed in law as a child, and then the next breath say that they're old enough to make an informed decision to vote. This is simply a fickle move by Labour to garner more votes. As for Keir taking credit for saving British Steel, it is akin to saving a drowning man who you threw in the water. It does take the rape gangs off the front pages, though. Surely Ed Miliband's position is now untenable. Hooray, says Mark. We are talking about votes at 16 with a 16-year-old and someone who's a little bit older. The 16-year-old's against it, and the person who's a little bit older, he's about, well, I don't know, 30. I don't know how old James Mathewson is, but certainly James Mathewson is for it, and the 16-year-old is against it. You're going to want to hear that a little bit later on, let me tell you. We've also got Daniel Britton back as well. I love Daniel Britton. It's like I am in the mere foothills of being a nerd. I'm not even at Everest Base Camp, and he is at the peak. He is sort of peak nerd, and he is going to tell us all about the constitutional and political history of bringing back Parliament, which is he's going to give us his thoughts on that a little bit later on in the programme. Daniel is it's just brilliant. Honestly, if he didn't exist, we'd need to invent him. Lots more from Simeon and Luke coming up in a minute. We're talking about the woman who was arrested for taking an iPad away from her daughter. Yes, really. This is Britain in 2025. Stay with us here on Talk.
The government are not focusing at all on providing that reassurance to our many family businesses, hard-working businesses that keep our local economies going in places like Keighley, where I represent. It is deeply frustrating. Business confidence is at an all-time low. Indeed, I was with one of my manufacturing businesses, a mighty business in Keighley, just yesterday, but yet the narrative that they were communicating to me is they are deeply concerned about the additional overheads that is being put on them by the government's choices.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right then, I'm sure many parents and grandparents out there have thought at some point, and I have certainly been in this position with my lovely 12-year-old nephew who, like many 12-year-olds, spends a lot of time on his devices, although his parents are very, very good at making sure he doesn't spend too much time. But there's a history teacher, Vanessa Brown, who has been searched, photographed and fingerprinted after taking her daughter's devices off them in an attempt to ensure they were not distracted from their studies. Look,
what to say about this case? Time and time again at the moment we're seeing the police behave in what is close to completely irrational ways, and I think that comes from a really problematic trend within policing, which is to treat every report of a crime as though it requires the maximal use of police force. We've seen this in the case involving Times Radio producer Maxie Allen, where he had 6 people showing up to his house.
6 police officers. You remember we spoke to Maxie on this show a couple of weeks ago. It was just outrageous. He was literally just sending emails about his daughter's education. Okay, they were a bit spicy, but they weren't abusive in any way. They weren't breaking the law in any way, as far as I could see. You're the expert, Luke. But certainly, it just seems that, you know, if you get your phone snatched, if you get your home broken into, it's very difficult to get the police to take any action. But as Vanessa Brown has found out, as Maxie Allen has found out, if there's a report in this way, well then the police come round rather than saying, hold on a second, let's just calm down here. This is a mother taking an iPad away from her daughter.
Absolutely, and I think what the police are failing to appreciate is just how traumatic and appalling an arrest for someone can be. They seem to think that it's perfectly acceptable to put someone through what is absolutely appalling treatment. Vanessa Brown talks about being left in custody for hours, fingerprinted, as you've said, intimate samples, all this sort of, it just seems completely bizarre. But it does follow from this culture within the police where every single complaint is now treated as a grounds to do something if something can be done. But at the same time, there is this culture that you talk about where if someone has their mobile phone nicked on the street, they think, well, there's nothing we can possibly do.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know people, and there'll be people I know in my personal experience, I would imagine Shimeen and Luke are the same, who will say things like, I've got the Ring doorbell footage, or I've got CCTV that I've got from the shopkeeper from whatever has happened. I mean, we have people taking huge amounts out of Greggs. We talked about this yesterday on my drive show. I do Friday drive between 4 and 7, and we were talking about people just taking loads of stuff from Greggs. There's footage about that the Sun have, and the police just won't do anything about it. But an iPad being taken away from a young person by her mother in her own home is apparently something which people should be arrested about. Shimeen.
Well, I approach this issue from a practical perspective. So we have resources in the police are stretched, resources in the courts are stretched, resources in the prison system are stretched, and that means we have to prioritize what we focus police attention on. And going after parents who confiscate iPads from children, going after people for WhatsApp chats, going after people from for their emails to their school, that's just not what the police should be doing. I mean, people expect the police to get the basics right. That means keeping the streets safe. That means that when you call a police officer, it doesn't take hours for them to arrive. And every hour of police attention being spent on all these frivolous cases means an hour less that can be spent on actual policing, the things that people actually care about.
Completely correct. I just agree with every single thing that you say. Another interesting aspect of this, Boris Johnson, who actually spoke to this week, interviewed him this week, not on Talk, but for a book I'm writing. He is in Texas at the moment, and he says the jailing of a mother for a tweet about the riots damages the UK's reputation as a haven for free expression and is a propaganda gift to our enemies. That is the view of the former Prime Minister. Liz Truss also agrees with that, as do various senior parliamentarians, Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. And Mr Johnson has claimed a lengthy deterrent sentence. This is Lucy Connolly. She tweeted a horrible thing on Twitter, which I don't think she should have tweeted, but nonetheless she did it. I'll read it out whilst not reading out all the words, if you know what I mean, as it is 10 to 11 in the morning. Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the effing hotels full of bees for all I care. While you're at it, take out the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure, she said, talking about Southport. If that makes me racist, so be it. And Boris Johnson has said a mother and childminder with no previous convictions was jailed for 31 months because of a rapidly deleted tweet. This has caused amazement among our friends and allies, notably in America, where they have constitutional protections for free speech. And Boris Johnson has been in Washington and indeed Texas this week. Luke, your thoughts as a lawyer on this?
We saw a lot of cases in the aftermath of Southport of people being arrested for what they tweeted. And the connection that the authorities drew was between, and the judge did this when he sentenced Lucy Connolly, and it's part of the reason why she got the sentence that she did, is that the authorities seemed to think that there was a direct connection between what people said online and the explosion of violence. And I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to prove. To seriously claim that Lucy Connolly was in any way responsible for the appalling violence that we saw in the aftermath of Southport was totally wrong. And, you know, we call this a deterrent sentence. In other words, you know, we saw in the aftermath of Southport the government, Keir Starmer particularly, saying, watch what you tweet, trying to create this idea that if you say the wrong thing online, you could face very heavy sanction. The justification being that they thought that this was being spread by social media. Now, in one sense, that was true, but it has resulted in these appallingly long sentences. It would have been open. I haven't looked at the sentencing remarks of the judge in detail, but I can't yet explain why her sentence was not at least suspended, meaning that she receives a prison sentence of less than 2 years, which is then suspended, allowing her to serve it in the community. I mean, we hear a lot about...
And there's so many people, Luke, who, and you'll know this far better than I will as a lawyer, where you just say, hold on a second, Hugh Edwards downloaded and received images of children that were the worst possible image, and he didn't go to prison, he got a suspended sentence, but Lucy Connolly does for sending a tweet that I don't think is a very nice tweet. I also don't think she should be in prison. Shimian, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think once again I come to this issue from a practical perspective. I mean, the idea that we can somehow police social media. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tweets being sent a day. A lot of these will be from anonymous accounts where it's very difficult to trace. And I think it's impossible to expect the police to trace them all and to police them all. I mean, once again, this is the same problem between aspiration and reality. The government wants to treat speech on social media as if it was said in real life, when in actual fact there are a lot of practical difficulties in terms of actually being able to police that. I mean, just think, if there's an anonymous account, how are the police going to be able to find that person? They're going to have to email, they're going to have to submit a request to the social media site, so they're going to have to submit a request to get the IP address, they're going to have to take that IP address to the internet provider, they're going to have to figure out who lives at that address, whether or not they do it.
I mean, your point is well made, Shimian, and actually Keir Starmer talking this week about police forces could actually essentially be fined, funding would be withdrawn from them if they don't do sort of bobbies on the beat neighbourhood policing. Well, actually, if you're going to police Twitter as well, that's going to be a practical problem there.
That's absolutely right. And in fact, there is already a mechanism to stop these sort of hateful and offensive tweets that are against the policies of these social media companies. You report these tweets and they get taken down. That's the solution. I don't see why the police have to be involved unless it's a particularly egregious example.
Some do and some don't. I've had interesting experiences with Twitter, let me tell you. I just want to play a few voice notes now and get your reaction briefly to them before we go to Parliament just after the 11 o'clock news. Patty has been in touch on the mum arrested for taking her kid's iPad.
Good morning, Peter. Patty from Coulsdon here. Talking about the lady, the mum who was arrested for confiscating her kids' iPads so that they'd work a little harder on their homework. I don't think that her husband, who apparently was the one who reported her, is getting enough publicity in this. The police are absolutely stupid, but I think the husband should be called to account as well, because he doesn't sound like a particularly nice character in all of this. Anyway, usual great show. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Paddy. Much appreciated. I don't know who reported that, and certainly maybe there was a motive that perhaps wasn't the purest. We don't know, but certainly, Paddy, very, very interesting message there. A couple now I want to take just before we get to the top of the hour from Nick and then Jackie about Parliament being recalled. Then I'll get some thoughts from Simeon and Luke. Let's play Nick and then Jackie, please.
Good morning, Peter. Starmer's crocodile tears over the potential collapse of British Steel are risible, given that it's the net zero lunacy that has driven up energy prices to such an extent that it is no longer viable to make steel in this country. Are we actually seeing the beginning of a rowback after they are realising that their net zero lunatic policies, they're not viable either? Maybe we're seeing the beginning of a retreat on this. Let's hope so. Have a good weekend, Peter.
Thank you, Nick. Let's hear from Jackie.
Morning, Peter. The recall of Parliament would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. You have the two main parties that are going to debate the future of British Steel when it's their net zero policies which have contributed massively to why this industry is in such dire straits.
Thank you very much indeed, Jackie, there. Simeon, just a reaction to those voice notes, please.
Well, I think the last-minute way in which this whole recall of Parliament was done is symptomatic of the fact that they don't really have a long-term plan in order to make British Steel viable. I mean, if we are really going down the road of nationalisation, the government should be very clear about how much this is going to cost taxpayers, how long it's going to be going on for, and what's the long-term plan to return British Steel to profitability.
Quick thought from you, Luke?
I just would supplement. I mean, I don't think we can afford to have this ideological opposition to state involvement in industry at this particular moment. British Steel is absolutely essential to our infrastructure, our dependence on foreign companies, on foreign governments to create the essentials of our national infrastructure is a massive problem, and it's one that the state has a legitimate interest in. So yes, return to profitability, but that probably does mean leaving behind the fixation on net zero. And I do think this, as your caller suggests, might represent a little bit of a rollback. Keir Starmer said he was happier being in Davos than in Westminster. Yeah. He's going to have to start thinking about some more UK-based concerns.
We've literally about a minute left. I want 10 seconds from each of you about whether there should be votes at 16. Simeon, I think, is the closest of much of the three of us to 16. Should 16-year-olds have the vote?
Well, I think the line at which you draw who can vote and who can't vote is essentially arbitrary, but I think it shouldn't be done for political purposes. I mean, if we're going to extend the vote, it shouldn't be done just because we think that 16-year-olds will vote a particular way.
Yeah, it's always been a gimmick to try and drive up voter engagement, and the best way to drive up voter engagement is to give people policies that they're excited about, not lower the age at which they can vote.
No, there's a radical idea. It'll never catch on, Luke. Thank you both very much indeed. That's Luke Gittos there, who's a lawyer and writer, and Simeon Lee, policy analyst taxpayer at the Taxpayers Alliance. First time on the debate desk, and certainly will not be his last. Thank you to everybody who has been in touch. We're going to make sure that you get your say between now and 12:30. Plenty of calls coming in. Please add to them as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to go live to Parliament very, very soon to see what is happening there, because it has been recalled on a Saturday for the first time since 2001. We'll be talking to a constitutional expert about that as well, and asking whether people should get votes at 16. Talking to a 16-year-old who thinks, no, actually they shouldn't. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Plenty still to come here on Talk.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino?
Right? Yeah, a rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence. into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet, and it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its two front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich. Don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as a family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. As an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the magpie, which is much bigger, every springtime, the folk in...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this morning. We're going to go live to Parliament very, very soon. Keir Starmer will be speaking and indeed talking about British Steel. Parliament has been recalled for the first time since 2001 on a Saturday, and what we're going to find out is what the government think about it, what they're going to do about it. Jonathan Reynolds is the Business Secretary. I expect we'll hear from him as well. We will also be hearing, I'm sure, from Kemi Badenoch. This emergency debate is happening very, very soon. In the next couple of minutes, we'll bring you live to Parliament. Lots of people in touch about that as well. We'll also ask the question whether people should get votes at 16 in this country. What do you think about that? We've got a 16-year-old who thinks actually no, they shouldn't, and someone who's a little bit older who thinks they should. As always, we want to get your views on everything. We're talking about the USA, tariffs, Iran. We've got it all between now and 12:30. The number to call is 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and remember the main number does 3 things. You can send in a voice note. We had a few of those just before the news. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. That is the number to call to get your voice on the air. Plenty to talk about between now and 12:30, and we will reflect what's happening on in Parliament too. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, let's have a look at what's happening in Parliament at the moment, because very, very shortly we're going to hear from the Prime Minister. Certainly the Speaker is talking at the moment, Sir Lindsay Hoyle.
Second reading what day? Today.
So they're talking about the bill that's going forward.
Motion number 1 on the Steel Industry Special Measures Bill of the House. I call the Minister to move. The Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion standing in my name, and I don't intend to detain the House for long, as we've got an important debate to follow.
So this is Lucy Powell speaking at the moment. She is the Leader of the House of Commons. Let's hear from her.
Parliament today. As ever, you've been incredibly accommodating and understanding. You recognise the scale and urgency of what we need to do today, and I know these are very important matters to you personally and to the House as a whole. Can I also thank the House staff, Mr. Speaker, who responded quickly and professionally to facilitate this extraordinary meeting of the House, and to all those colleagues who are here at such short notice today. We meet in these special circumstances because the Government needs to act decisively, at pace and with urgency to ensure that the steelworks blast furnaces of British Steel are maintained and kept going, saving thousands of jobs and securing our domestic production of virgin steel. The Secretary of State will shortly set out the powers he needs to do this through the Steel Industry Special Measures Bill published online this morning. If the House agrees to this business motion, the arrangements for today provide for second reading committee report.
So that's Lucy Powell there. She is the leader of the House of Commons, just outlining what's going to happen in Parliament today. Jonathan Reynolds is the Business Secretary. He's going to be putting the motion forward and talking about that. We'll dip in a little bit in a minute or two, and we'll hear from Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, when he gets to his feet. But in the meantime, I want to speak to Angela Knight, who's the former Chief Executive of Energy UK. She's a former Treasury Minister for the Conservatives as well. Angela, I'm afraid you're going to have to crave our indulgence as we dip in and out of Parliament just a little bit as time goes on. But first of all, Angela, maybe you could tell me your thoughts about whether you think British Steel should be nationalised. Do we have any alternative?
I don't think we have, actually. This has been a long time coming, not just British Steel, but the whole question of strategic industries and what we consider should be strategic industries here in the UK. We're over peak globalisation. We can see what's happening to supply chains now, which are when they're too long, and we've got this standoff, US versus China. So making sure that we have essential production of essential things here in the UK, I think, is absolutely up there. And they should have done something earlier, but I'm not going to criticise because government does take time to take some difficult decisions. But the other aspect that it shows is that we have to also spend some much more in-depth time and in-depth work on ensuring that our heavy industry is commercially viable. A lot of that sits around the artificially high price that they pay for electricity. And then you've got another piece which sits around, do we buy local, do we buy across our region, or do we buy further afield? And while some of those are political, some of those are just practical as well. And certainly coming back to that middle point I made, which is the price of energy, which is artificially high in the UK because of the way that we've decided to price electricity. That is something that's within our hands and something that needs to have as urgent a decision and as urgent a change made on it as this decision about British Steel.
I'm not sure it will, though, necessarily. And I wonder, in your experience as a parliamentarian as well, I mean, it's very rare for Parliament to sit on a Saturday. In fact, we're talking to a constitutional and political historian about that a little bit later on in the programme. Is this performative, or is this absolutely necessary to have this debate today, do you think, Angela?
Well, I can see why they were negotiating right up to the last minute, and presumably in hope that somehow the Chinese owners of British Steel, would come to the table, and they haven't come to the table. But equally, it does seem to me that this has been left awfully late. This is the last few seconds before you come to the point at which you cannot keep these furnaces going. And if you can't keep these furnaces going, then that feeds into the supply of virgin steel here in the UK, and everything. So much depends on that steel production that it's, you can't let it close. I don't think you could let it close for any reason. So yes, they could have done it a couple of weeks ago. They could have done it and had taken a more strategic political view a lot longer ago, but they haven't. And the one thing that I think is good, just looking at your picture of Parliament at the moment, is that a lot of MPs clearly are seeing this as a very serious issue too. And so they've come back from whatever was the start of their holiday, and they're going to take part in this debate, get this interim measures through, because I think it is only interim, a sort of temporary halfway house set of measures to prevent the furnaces closing, but it doesn't take full ownership into the state. So I'm glad that they're there and they're participating. But the next step, I'm sure, will be public ownership. And then what one has to do is not just get into the electricity price, but get into the whole raw material scenario and how we, really...
Let's get into that, actually. And maybe you could just explain to us, Angela, with your level of expertise in this, in regard to the idea of an electric arc. What is that, and why is it different from what the blast furnace does at the moment?
Okay, so electric arcs, got a lot of electric arcs furnace in the UK.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you there because Jonathan Reynolds is on his feet. We'll hear a little bit from him and then we'll come back to you, Angela. Apologies.
A second time. Mr. Speaker, we meet under exceptional circumstances.
This is the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds.
In what are exceptional times. Our request to recall Parliament was not one we have made lightly. And I am grateful, genuinely grateful, to honourable members on all sides of this House for their cooperation and for being here today as we seek to pass emergency legislation that is unequivocally in our national interest. I would also like to particularly thank the staff here in Parliament for facilitating today. I would like to thank the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Home Secretary for their support. Indeed, the only reason we can take this action today is because of the restoration of economic stability and the dedicated resources for steel in the last budget. I would like to recognise my honourable friend for Scunthorpe and the honourable member for Brigg and Immingham and for all my honourable friends from Teesside for their advocacy and engagement on behalf of their constituents throughout this matter. As honourable members will know, since taking office, this government has been negotiating in good faith with British Steel's owners, Xingye. We have worked tirelessly to find a way forward, making a generous offer of support to British Steel that included sensible, common-sense conditions to protect the workforce, to protect taxpayers' money, and create a commercially viable company for the future. Despite our offer to Xingye being substantial, they wanted much more. Frankly, an excessive amount. We did, however, remain committed to negotiation. But over the last few days, it became clear that the intention of Xingye was to refuse to purchase sufficient raw materials to keep the blast furnaces running. In fact, their intention was to cancel and refuse to pay for existing orders. The company would therefore have irrevocably and unilaterally closed down primary steelmaking at British Steel. Now, I want to make absolutely clear that separate to any conversation about a possible deal to co-invest in new facilities, the British government offered to purchase raw materials in a way that would have ensured no losses whatsoever for Xingye in maintaining the blast furnaces for a period of time. A counter-offer was instead made by Xingye for us to transfer hundreds of millions of pounds to them without any conditions to stop that money and potentially other assets being immediately transferred to China. They also refused a condition to keep the blast furnaces maintained.
So we're hearing from the Business Secretary there, Jonathan Reynolds. We'll bring you a little bit of his shadow when they come on as well. Angela, what do you make of what Jonathan Reynolds is saying there?
It's interesting, isn't it, that he says that they've negotiated, but they didn't find anybody really on the other side of the negotiation. Which again absolutely plays into the point that this is the step towards nationalisation, because unless the Chinese owners change their mind completely, then there is no further pursuit in negotiations that can take place. So the big questions that they're going to have to answer after today, they being government and us in the UK, is how we have this very valuable site operating commercially. And yes, it will have to do some conversions. I'm no doubt about that in my mind. But you need a blast furnace to produce virgin steel. An electric arc, you tend to melt scrap in an electric arc. And you can't necessarily get all the steel types that you want out of electric arc. Conversion is also extremely expensive, as we know. And part of this sits around the whole carbon reduction targets. And it seems to me that whilst carbon reduction targets are fine, what you can't do is shut down our basic industries in order to meet a carbon target. That is an equation that simply does not make sense. And I'm hopeful that however harsh and however difficult this particular debate, this particular decision may be, and of course it's not going to be cheap, this is going to be quite costly, that this then sets the more sensible debate for the future as to how we keep our heavy industry, our vital industries, pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals in particular, how we keep those here in this country and don't cause a slow closure chain of which British Steel is near the start.
Angela, thank you. That's Angela Knight there, who's the former Chief Executive of Energy UK. She's a former Treasury Minister as well, guiding us through that. Appreciate your thoughts on that, Angela, and apologies for taking you off the air just to hear from Jonathan Reynolds, who's still on his feet. He is the Business Secretary. Let's hear just a little bit more from Jonathan Reynolds now.
It's proportionate and a necessary step. It allows us to take control of British Steel's blast furnaces, maintaining steel production and by extension protecting the company's 3,500 strong workforce. Now, the bill does not transfer ownership to the government. We'll have to deal with this matter at a later date. I took the decision, Mr. Speaker, that given the exceptional nature of a recall, it would be better to limit the powers in this bill, which are still significant, rather than introduce more complex matters of property rights and public ownership at this time. I'll give way to you.
For giving way.
Well, that's Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, talking about the bill and what it does and what the powers of the government will be as a result. He was interrupted there by Jeremy Wright, who's a Conservative MP. He's on the screen at the moment. Lots of people getting in touch about this. Vincent says, if steelmakers want to keep in work, they've got to take a cut in wages. Jane says, why is it when Starmer tries to talk like a statesman, he just sounds more of a state? And Jane said some nice things as well about the interview this week. I've got to stop mentioning the interview this week with Frank McGuinness, the lawyer representing Hamas, but if you want to watch it, it's on YouTube. It's on my socials as well, at Peter Cardwell on Twitter. Graham has been in touch and says, on two-tier Keir, this is Graham in Birmingham, he says, our national security is at stake. I will always act in the national interest. Oh, please, pass the sick bucket, says Graham. If it wasn't so serious and he wasn't such a fool, it would be amusing. What he's actually doing is stoking a blast furnace to fury. See what you did there, Graham, with many, many millions of us, says Graham, who is slagging off Keir Starmer there to keep the blast furnace puns going. Dawn in Chelmsford says, I am in favour of protecting jobs in the steel industry, but how can we afford to pump public money into it? What next? Gas, electricity, water, the railways, perhaps? Well, we've pumped quite a lot of money into some of those as well. Cliff in Berkshire says, steel is, in my opinion, an essential industry. Our government needs to decide whether they want growth or net zero. They cannot have both. Growth of 0.5% is 50 pence. Growth per £100 is like peeing in the sea, says Cliff in Berkshire. We've had some arresting metaphors today, or perhaps some of my puns for which I should be arrested. As Starmer is in Parliament today, does that mean he won't be making another freebie at Arsenal? The man is a joke. Well, the good news is the Arsenal match, I'm reliably informed, because of a friend going to it, isn't until 5:30, so maybe he'll get there after all. Joanna in Salisbury, keep British Steel, get rid of Ed Miliband and his net zero. We will be quids in coal for the steelworks, oil, gas and fracking. And one more from Leslie, who says, unless Starmer cancels net zero, I can see taxpayers bailing out what will end up being a hugely expensive to run pink elephant. I think you perhaps mean white elephant, Leslie, or maybe it's early in the day and you're having perhaps a little tipple with a pink elephant in it. You never know. Richard Tice has asked a question as well. He has intervened with Jonathan Reynolds. Richard Tice, of course, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. We'll go back to the comments now briefly to hear from Jonathan Reynolds.
Magic wand or a panacea. The state cannot fund the long-term transformation of British Steel itself, nor would it want to do so. But a failure to act today would prevent any more desirable outcome from even being considered. And that is, again, why we must act today.
So that's Jonathan Reynolds there saying we must act today. He is, of course, the Business Secretary. We'll hear from his shadow, Andrew Griffith, who is the Conservatives' shadow Business Secretary. We'll hear from him after the break. We'll also talk to Daniel Britton, who is a constitutional and political historian, about how rare it is for Parliament to come back. And if you have views on what Jonathan Reynolds has said, what the government is doing, well, let me know. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
years. This is a loss-making industry, but it is crucial for our economic and actually our structural integrity in this country, literally structural integrity.
Yeah, and overall national security. We cannot be wholly dependent on other people, and we as a country cannot be wholly dependent on other people for something as crucial as this very, sort of pure steel, particularly at a time, as you say, when the government says it wants to, sort of build, be it homes, be it investing more in infrastructure and all the rest of it, and we just seem to have left ourselves terribly, terribly exposed.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Parliament is in session for one of the first times on a Saturday since 2001. Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, putting the case forward about why he thinks he should get additional powers. Quite a few MPs talking as well. Here's Ian Duncan-Smith.
Set a particular date, and the government should. It brings the government back here to debate whether they should extend that process, and puts therefore a reasonable limit on government activity without debate. So I wonder if you could explain why there is no sunset clause in this bill.
Absolutely understand and welcome the question from the honourable gentleman.
And the sunset clause is something which means the legislation doesn't be enacted anymore. You can say we're going to enact this but for a year or so. Here's Jonathan Reynolds.
That they were required for, but I will endeavour and commit at the dispatch books to keep the House updated. Perhaps I may ask the Select Committee for their involvement around that in order to make clear how long we believe. And just to be absolutely specific, where we make an order in relation to control of a steel undertaking, once that control has been established and it's no longer required, we can revoke those regulations.
So that's a sort of interesting aspect of all of this, because the government is getting new powers. It's not quite nationalisation, but Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, essentially saying that he will have control to direct this company, British Steel, owned by this Chinese sort of parent company. Ian Duncan-Smith, former leader of the Conservative Party, asking there, hold on a second here, this is quite a big power for government to have. How long is it going to last? Are you going to have what's called a sunset clause in this bill, which means that it sunsets, essentially it ends after a year or 2 years? So Jonathan Reynolds talking about that. We're going to keep an eye on Parliament because it's sitting on a Saturday for the first time, as I say, since the Afghanistan war. And actually, that's an interesting aspect of all of this. It's a very rare thing. Daniel Britton is a parliamentary historian, constitutional historian as well. I'll just be honest, one of my favourite guests. He is. I think I'm a nerd, and then I talk to Daniel, and I admire his nerdery. I say that with great love. Daniel, it's wonderful to talk to you. Tell me how rare this is. You've seen one of these before. You've been there. I think it was during the Falklands, was it?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm old enough for that, Peter. Thank you very much for asking me this morning. I wasn't actually there, but I'm not that old, but I was listening very, very attentively in 1982, the Falklands debate on the Saturday. And that was actually the last time that MPs and peers came back on a Saturday in the middle of a parliamentary recess. That's quite a long time ago. And it was a very, very, very serious occasion.
Because this recess, of course, this is their Easter recess at the moment, and the fact that they've been off since Tuesday, as you say, the Falklands obviously very important for there, but they have come back on various occasions when Parliament's been sitting, like during Afghanistan, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I can think of the last one I remember, actually, Peter, was when tributes were paid to Her Majesty the Queen after her death in 2022, September. There was a Saturday sitting then, and before that, as you say, there had been one about Afghanistan. On those occasions, Parliament had been sitting in the week leading up to the Saturday, and then they just sat the next day. It has to be said that these occasions are quite popular in the Commons because MPs want to be seen there, and also they're quite popular in the House of Lords because the peers get an additional fee for turning up on the Saturday.
Yes, and certainly we have parliamentarians, if they come back from a holiday, if they come back from abroad. I'm told by Andrew Rossendale, the MP for Romford, who was in this studio a little bit earlier on, they apparently can get their travel expenses paid for them and their family if they're coming back from, say, a sunshine break in Marbs or wherever it is.
Well, I didn't know about that, but, you know, it's very tiresome having to come back from a holiday, as you and I have probably experienced in our career.
I certainly have had many a holiday ruined by what's happening in politics, let me tell you, over my 3.5 years as a special advisor. But I think there'll be a lot of people wondering about the cost of all that. What does it all mean in terms of the Constitution? Does it matter when parliamentary legislation is passed? Is there any difference in that?
No, but these things do tend to be passed in a bit of a rush. I mean, I'd be very surprised if there were any amendments from the House of Lords this afternoon. They've got a day. It's going to be allowed to go through. People might raise concerns, and they might get raised at another time, but I'd be very surprised if there are any very successful amendments which need to return to the Commons today. We get this funny situation where the bill is in the Commons now, the Lords are hanging around, waiting till the Commons finish with it, and then the Lords start debating the bill, and the Commons hang around, maybe they'll and wait for it to finish in the House of Lords at the various stages like that. These are always unusual, but the Business Secretary has said that these particular powers are likely to rescind many of them when it's finally sorted out. It is an unusual position. The government is seeking the powers to direct a private company but not nationalise it. I'm sure you've discussed that a lot this morning, but that is a very unusual constitutional arrangement.
Certainly. Daniel, thanks for your thoughts on that. That's Daniel Britton there, parliamentary historian, constitutional historian, and someone who never has carbs before Mars, it must be said. That is Daniel Britton. Jonathan Reynolds still on his feet. Let's hear a little bit more from the Business Secretary.
Negotiate a better deal. And just to be clear, as a result of that, Port Talbot is in a stronger position than British Steel because it has that long-term future in place, because we improved the deal that she botched at that time.
Jonathan Reynolds reacting to criticism there, I think. Andrew Griffith, who is his shadow, the shadow business secretary, raising a point there about Port Talbot and why the government didn't do more for that. Kemi Badenoch on the opposition benches as well. Matt's in Cheshire. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Matt, I'm just going to warn you right now that if Andrew Griffith stands up, the shadow business secretary, we're going to hear a little bit from him, so I may have to cut you off, but I don't think that's going to happen just at the moment. Let's hear what you have to say, Matt.
It's great to see the charisma of our MP, Jonathan Reynolds, commanding the House.
Matt, you know the difference between someone who makes the sarcastic remark and the person who doesn't get it? Do you know what that's called? It's called the sarcasm.
Oh, okay.
What do you make of all this, Matt?
It's just an act of political theatre to show that they're on the side of British infrastructure.
I mean, they are getting more powers here. This isn't just performative.
Yeah, I understand that, but unless they actually bring down the price of energy for all industry, it's completely. It means nothing. And as Ian Duncan Smith just said, unless there's a sunset clause, they don't really have. From what I'm hearing, from what they've just said, the content of the bill doesn't really stress anything specific. So it's just, we'll bring them back on a Saturday. Everyone will see it on TV. We'll keep mentioning working people, and it'll make it look like Ed Miliband is sat 3 doors down from him, and he's destroying British industry single-handedly. So how can they say all this and then sort of be...
And there is that question, Matt, that question about net zero and how reasonable that is. I mean, Sean's been in touch from Bridlington, sent me a message saying, without ditching net zero, this will be a manufacturing industry whack-a-mole. Every industry that relies on affordable energy is doomed with net zero, says Sean. I would imagine you would agree with that, Matt.
Of course, yeah. It's just, at the end of the day, there's no long-term... unless Ed Miliband is sacked and we go back to some rational sort of energy policies. And it's not just for industry. People in general want cheaper energy too. You know, we were told we would get cheaper energy bills. That's not happened. So
yeah, no,
for me, it's just like a communist show trial to show us how they're all on our side.
Matt, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. There was Matt in Cheshire. I don't think he's entirely convinced by what's going on in Parliament today. Just my sense. I've done this for a while. Sometimes you just pick these things up intuitively. Amanda's been in touch and says, regarding the vote for 16-year-olds, as my father used to say, you don't know you were born before you've lived. Most 16-year-olds are more interested in partying, politics. Politics only interests a few at that stage. I'd have loved to vote at 16. I'm just going to be totally honest with you, but I don't think 16-year-olds should be given the vote. We're going to talk to a 16-year-old in just a minute who agrees that 16-year-olds shouldn't be given the vote, and someone who's a little bit older who thinks they should. I wonder what you think about this. This came up this week. Keir Starmer was talking about this at the Liaison Committee. This is the sort of super committee of select committee chairs. They all scrutinise the government in all the different areas, and they were asking Keir Starmer about this. He said it's going to happen. Votes at 16 will be something. It's a manifesto commitment pledge. We're going to talk about that and continue to monitor what is going on at the emergency debate over British Steel in Parliament in just a few minutes here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Kemi Badenoch's on her feet in Parliament at the moment. Let's hear what she has to say.
A functioning commercial deal in Port Talbot. The same was going to happen with British Steel had we not had a snap election. What he is doing now, Mr. Speaker, is the union-pushed deal. They brought that deal to me, Mr. Speaker. I said no, he said yes.
Mr. Speaker, this is genuinely revelatory. I say again, if Xingye's request was for £1.2 billion to build at lesser cost in one place, what was the sum of money agreed by the Leader of the Opposition when she was Business Secretary to build in two places? Give it, because it certainly wasn't in the accounts of the Chancellor. I will give that. How much money was agreed to Xingye to close the jobs in Scunthorpe?
So Jonathan Reynolds asking the former Trade Secretary, now Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, what went on under her watch?
You are negotiating. You do not have... They're cheering and laughing because they love this. They think that the public taking on billions of pounds of liabilities is fantastic. We had not finished the negotiation, so there was no amount. But it would have succeeded better than the terrible plan that he's got now.
Well, that's Kemi Badenoch disagreeing very strongly with Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary in Parliament. That is happening at the moment, one of the first parliamentary sessions for quite a while, certainly the first legislation to be passed since 2001. But as Daniel Britton correctly pointed out, there were tributes to Her Majesty the Queen when she died a couple of years ago. We will continue to monitor what happens in Parliament. We'll bring you a little bit more of that as time goes on. But for the meantime, I just want to talk about something that's actually also relevant to politics, because this week Keir Starmer was at this committee of MPs, the liaison committee, senior MPs, talking to him about all sorts of issues, and one of those issues was about votes for 16-year-olds. We will definitely get it done, Keir Starmer told the House of Commons liaison committee. It is a manifesto commitment and we intend to honour it. Well, this week, believe it or not, I got a phone call from a very nice woman and her son. Her son is called Max, and he is a student. And I thought Max was so articulate, we'd just ask him on again. I wondered, whatever it was, we were going to represent his opinion on votes for 16-year-olds. Max Goldsmith is with us now, as is James Mathewson. James Mathewson is a former Labour spokesman. Thanks both for joining me. Max, perhaps I can start with you. You're a 16-year-old. You're interested in politics. Yeah. I was a sort of chief nerd in my school. When I was your age, I was reading John Major's autobiography instead of, I don't know, doing things I shouldn't have been doing. And I wonder, do you think you should be given the vote as a 16-year-old?
First of all, hi Peter, thanks for having me on the show. But no, I don't think we should get the vote, because if you look at the demographics of the voters, of the young voters, about 18 to 25-year-olds, most of them lean towards the left, lean towards Labour. And I feel like Keir Starmer is only proposing a vote for 16-year-olds solely because it's about 1.5 million 16 and 17-year-olds in the country, and about 2/3 of them would vote Labour. So I feel like he's only doing it for the sole benefit of himself and the Labour Party, and he's not looking at the bigger picture.
So cynical from someone so young, Max. I just wonder, I mean, do you not want to exercise what would become your democratic right and have a say in the future of your country? If an election was called tomorrow, you wouldn't have a vote.
Yeah, I know, but I feel like my voice can be heard in different ways at 16 years old, and I don't need to voice my opinion at 16. I feel like that's why we have the vote at 18, because it's more of a responsibility, and 16-year-olds shouldn't have that responsibility at 16.
You're 16. Do your friends, do your fellow 16, 17-year-olds care about this? Are they agitating for this and say, we should get the vote?
I mean, 16 being 16, I don't think most of my friends would struggle to know who Demi Badenoch was, like the Conservative leader. So I feel like, no, they don't really care as much as I do, but
sure,
we need the vote should stay at 18, in my opinion.
Okay, James Mathewson, you are perhaps a little bit older than 16, perhaps even closer to my age of 14 than 16. I don't know. Sorry, what did you say?
Outrageous speculation.
How old are you? Come on, this is relevant to the discussion. How old are you, James?
I am somewhere between the ages of 30 and 32.
Okay, well, I think that's pretty clear. Why do you disagree with Max?
Firstly, Max is clearly a really articulate young lad, and it's great to have him on the show as well. I think you should do that more often, definitely. But I think, in my opinion, it comes down to quite a simple argument, and that's that if you can pay tax and you can work, then you deserve to have the right to decide where your taxes are spent, because ultimately that's what politics is. And you can pay tax from the age of 16. I was working, I dropped out of school, left high school when I was 16. Many of my friends were in university. They didn't care about politics, didn't care about work in life, they didn't care about things that were going on. But I was working full time and I was paying tax. And I deserve to have the right to decide where in my community that money gets spent, how the government decides to spend my hard-earned tax. And that's what it comes down to for me. Of course, there are many other arguments and, foundations and charities from Joseph Rowntree to Electoral Reform Society. They're all calling for this. And in Scotland, where I am right now, in Edinburgh, they've already lowered the voting age, 16, 17-year-olds. And they've seen a huge uptake in people not only using their democratic right to vote from that age, but continuing to do so because they get into it at a younger age. It becomes more of a habit. And as for the maturity argument, I understand that. But look, we all know 50 and 60-year-olds who aren't mature yet to vote. We all know people who aren't, responsible at any age when it comes to it. So it's different for everyone. I certainly at 16, wasn't, I think, mature enough to to kind of...
I know someone who's about my age, a friend of mine who has no interest in politics whatsoever, none, who voted Labour because she likes Keir Starmer's hair. That is the reason she voted Labour.
That's a valid opinion.
Is it? I'm not so sure. Just let's be cynical for a second, James. I mean, this fits your way of thinking, but young people do tend to be a bit more left-wing.
Why are you scared of that?
I'm not scared of it. I'm just saying that it might be a bit cynical to actually say that, okay, let's do vote to 16. I mean, at least part of Keir Starmer's thinking of that must be thinking, lots more Labour voters.
Well, I believe Keir Starmer's held this opinion even when he was in the CPS before he was part of the Labour Party, about democratising and spreading out the vote and bring it down to a younger age. We have a weird kind of alignment with ages of responsibility for things, don't we? If you think about it, the age of consent for sexual relations is 16. You've got, obviously, you can join the army, but you can't go and be deployed to a battlefield until you're 18. You could smoke at 16. Now that's 18.
Yeah.
Drink at 18. You could drive at 17. It's all kind of all over the place. So what we're saying is you're mature enough for some things, but not for other things. It would be better, I think, if there was some alignment on that. But as you say, at the same time, some people will never find themselves informed enough on politics, but democracy is important and it's core value.
Max, I promise you I'll come back to you in a minute, but I just want to go straight back to Parliament to hear Andrew Griffith. He is the Shadow Business Secretary. He's responding in this emergency debate, emergency recall of Parliament on British Steel. Here's Andrew Griffith.
To secure Port Talbot, and were negotiating a plan, including British Steel's preferred option of an electric arc furnace in Teesside. That would have limited job losses and kept Scunthorpe running in transition. Once again, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. The Chagos Islands, US tariffs, the train drivers, and now this latest crisis. Mr. Speaker, a bad toolmaker blames his tools. But this time, they've only themselves to blame. I'll give way.
That's Andrew Griffith there. He is the Shadow Business Secretary for the Conservatives. Just a little flavour of what he's talking about in this emergency debate. Final word now to Max Goldsmith. He is 16-year-old student, schoolboy. And Max, what do you make of the arguments that James Mathieson has made there, Max?
No, so I feel like the point on when you dropped out of school at 16, you've got to realise at 16 you're still doing your GCSEs. You haven't got the time to pay attention to the votes and all the policies all the parties align to, because you've got other issues.
Not everyone does that though, Max, do they? Even older voters who vote all the time, they're not across all the detail, are they?
Yeah, no, but still, you've got to draw the line somewhere, and I feel like 16 is drawing a line far too low, because people will not pay attention at all to the vote, and they'll only vote based off what they see on social media and their family influence, rather than your own opinion and your own views. And I feel like only a handful of kids will drop out of school at 16. Most will continue to do A-levels. Okay. So they still aren't in a job, they aren't paying tax, and they wouldn't know what's the best for the country at that stage in their life.
Thank you both very much indeed. That is Max Goldsmith there, who's a student, and James Mathieson. James Mathieson is a former Labour spokesman. And Max, interestingly, his mum and he rang in this week. And thanks for that call, Max, as well, I should have said. Very, very nice of you and your mum to ring in. And it was very kind of you to do that. And we just thought, do you know what, we'll get Max on again. And then he spoke well the other day, and he spoke very well today as well, I think. And thank you to him for doing so. And his mum, Hayley, gave him permission, because if you're on national radio when you're under 18, you need to make sure that you have permission of your mum or your dad or a legal guardian. Anyway, we'll discuss this and indeed go back to Parliament. In fact, let's just go back to Parliament very, very briefly now. Andrew Griffith was on his feet. I think he's back on his feet now. Andrew Griffith, the Shadow Business Secretary.
I'm Johnny.
That's the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle there. Let's see who's coming up.
Government which is shipping coking coal, I believe, just off the coast
of Graham Stewart
from Japan, when it was perfectly possible to have the greenest production of coking coal in the world, in Cumbria, with thousands of jobs. And isn't it a disgrace that this government turns its back on jobs in Cumbria and indeed in the North Sea, because it puts ideology ahead of practicality and even ahead of the environment?
Yeah.
That's Graham Stewart, Conservative MP.
Is absolutely right, and
Griffith.
sad to say, Scunthorpe is the victim of exactly that policy, putting ideology before the interests of British interests. Mr. Speaker, now we'll make some progress. Millions of other businesses are also struggling with their energy bills. It's why the Chancellor's tax choices have been so devastating. Steel may be the first domino to topple, but glass, chemicals, cars and concrete are other industries at risk.
That's Andrew Griffith there, who is the Shadow Business Secretary. He was responding to what Jonathan Reynolds said. You heard another man speaking a minute ago, Graham Stewart, the Conservative MP for Beverley and Holderness, who was talking just as we rejoined Parliament. We're keeping an eye on Parliament, what's happening, a very rare Saturday sitting, talking about this legislation that's going through. We'll get your views on all of this, including votes at 16, next here on Talk.
Years, this is a loss-making industry, but it is crucial for our economic and actually our structural integrity in this country, literally structural integrity.
Yeah, and overall national security. We cannot be wholly dependent on other people, and we as a country cannot be wholly dependent on other people for something as crucial as this very, sort of pure steel, particularly at a time, as you say, when the government says it wants to, sort of build, be it homes, be it investing more in infrastructure and all the rest of it, and we just seem to have left ourselves terribly, terribly exposed.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Parliament is in session at the moment. There's a debate ongoing about British Steel in Scunthorpe. We'll bring you the highlights of that as the programme goes on between now and 12:30. But let's talk a little bit about getting people to Parliament in the first place. Most people watching and listening to this programme will have the vote, of course, but 16-year-olds, Keir Starmer says, should have the vote between 16 and 18. Rob says Daniel Radcliffe paid tax at 10, so should a 10-year-old have the vote? That's Rob in Hampshire. Nick Moore says anyone of any age earning over the tax threshold is liable to pay income tax. So should we allow child actors to vote? Also, everyone has to be in education now until the age of 18. An interesting point as well, I should have probably made this to James Mathewson. I was just thinking about it over the break. He said, I paid tax, therefore I should have the vote. Well, a lot of people in this country, they do pay tax, they pay VAT and all sorts of different taxes when they're buying things, but a lot of people, millions of people, don't pay income tax, for example, don't pay the main tax. So should that be a bar to voting? I mean, this argument could go on forever. This person says Labour justify votes for 16-year-olds with the mantra, if you're old enough to pay tax, you're old enough to vote. Shirley Temple paid tax when she was 6 years old. So much for that argument. Shirley Temple's gone back a while. And John in Chelmsford says, well, I'll come back to that actually. Michelle says kids are not mature enough at 16 and very easily manipulated. This idea is as slimy as it gets. Typical Labour. It just gets worse, says Michelle. Let's speak to Joe in Bournemouth. Joe, should 16-year-olds be given the vote?
Well, I don't think they generally should do, but I think you just touched on it there, where we were talking about politicians now aiming for votes and a lot of things happening purely to get votes. And I think we need to do away with that by making it law that only if you pay income tax can you vote in this country.
That's a radical idea. I mean, there are a lot of pensioners don't pay income tax as well. Would you be disenfranchising them as well, Joe?
No, it'd be ironed out. Obviously, you've got mums that are looking after children. Yep. You can iron this out, can't you? It's not. Well, I'm not saying across the board like that. It has to be looked at and worked out how things work. Is there a limit they put on it? Is there no limit? Obviously, pensions that are paid in. Maybe if you move to this country, you've got a 5 years back history paying in before you can vote. You know,
they do that in some countries. Certainly, you've got to be contributing to the country for some time before you get a vote. It's an interesting one, Joe. Do you think 18-year-olds are mature enough to vote? Because it used to be 21, of course.
Not nowadays, unfortunately. I don't think 16-year-olds are 18 or 21, really. I think they're just especially with TikTok and social media now, they're led down lines of a couple of things that they look at, and then they're fed certain things that they all believe in.
And it's not just young people as well influenced by those factors. They're older people as well, but their vote is worth just as much as yours and mine, Joe.
It is, and that's why I think we need to be looking at who's contributing and actually paying for this country to function.
OK, interesting thoughts there, Joe in Bournemouth. Thank you for that. Quite a few people getting in touch about this. Leslie says Labour pandering to keep the Muslim vote now votes for 16-year-olds. 16-year-olds cannot join the army without parental permission. Tracy in Wakefield says, well done, Max, an impressive young man who spoke a lot of sense. Agree with that. When the 16-year-olds get the vote, this texter says, will they also be able to buy cigarettes, alcohol, get married and be tried as adults? And just on what is happening in Parliament at the moment, where we're keeping an eye on what's happening. Andrew Griffiths, the Shadow Business Secretary, is talking at the moment. Dawn says, I'm impressed with the authority and poise of Jonathan Reynolds in the parliamentary debate. As a solicitor, he has a natural command of his brief, says Dawn. I think perhaps with his tongue in his cheek. You may remember that Jonathan Reynolds made the point that he was a solicitor when actually he was not a qualified solicitor. I just want to hear just a tiny bit more of what Andrew Griffiths, the Shadow Business Secretary, is saying in Parliament.
So there we are, Mr. Speaker. A disrespect of this House. The government has treated Parliament with disdain. 9 months of dither and delay. A botched nationalisation of steelmaking with the British taxpayer on the hook. It's crystal clear. When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. This is not a serious government. It's a government shaped by events, not one in control of them. It's a government by sulky teenager, not sharing their plans, not answering the question, and when it goes wrong, it's everyone's fault but theirs.
Andrew Griffith there, the Shadow Business Secretary, winding up his speech there, and there will be a vote on this. It'll go through. Well, there may not be a vote, actually. I think it'll just go through without a vote. We will see what happens, but plenty of other MPs wanting to speak as well, standing up, attempting to catch the eye of the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Tracy in Wakefield says, morning Peter, the thing that worries me regarding the steel issue, that this is another power grab for this government who to me are communists. Also, what experience do any of the politicians have to run a business? And Francis says, an interesting observation I watch on Parliament TV, a few Lib Dems are on the benches. Maybe they're not interested in national security over other parts of what people want to talk about. Lib Dems are fully behind net zero, responsible for the UK reducing nuclear capacity, and anti-Trump. And Joe Moore, who's in Leicester, and says, good morning, Peter. I'm sure I speak for the majority of this nation when I say I cannot watch and cannot listen to these people sitting in Westminster anymore. They're all traitors to this country. They should be held accountable for the irreparable damage they have caused our nation. They appall and disgust me. They should be hanging their heads in shame, in my opinion. David in South Wales says, they make you absolutely sick to the stomach when you hear these self-entitled creatures talking in Parliament. Why don't they think it is in the national interest to protect the young girls and kids in this country from being raped? Another one on that from Neil, who says, recall Parliament so we all forget about the child rape gangs. They must think we, non-Labour voters, are stupid. And another person says, Reynolds has the goal to say restoration of economic stability. He needs to get out more. Herbie is in Harrow and has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Herbie, you're on the air. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Peter. Well, the straw that broke the camel's back has now happened, I'm afraid, Peter. We've lost the plot completely. They're out of control. They do not know what to do. They cannot run a business, and we're sinking like a...
But they've got a plan, Herbie. They've got a plan. They're saying they are essentially taking control of British Steel. They're going to pump money into it. They're going to rescue British Steel because they say we have to rescue it. Surely they do have a plan, and they do know what they're doing. They would argue. Anyway, Herbie.
Oh, come on, Peter. It's a bit too late, isn't it? I mean, to say, talk about closing the gate after the horse is bolted, I think this is quite true. You know, they've been known for a long time. Look, the Chinese own these Southwark, so the steel works. If they close that down, that means the Chinese can then import their steel cheap to us, and we're going to have to pay for it. This is going on time and time after again on all our businesses. We seem to be selling them off, and we seem to be landing it up with it going bust, and we're having to pay for the price. The most expensive electricity in the world, and we're still paying for it because of Mad Ed. It's madness, Peter, the whole damn thing.
Thanks,
we need a committee to work together.
Okay. Herbie, thanks for your thoughts. I appreciate them. Cliff in Berkshire has talked about actually, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read this out from Jason in the Lake District. He says, I worked for 10 years at British Steel and Aldwork in Rotherham, predominantly in exporting the steel. This is a man who knows what he's talking about here. From 1996 to 2001, I sent hundreds of samples to China at our expense for them to simply melt it, analyse it, and then make it cheaper themselves, all while the Labour government let it go to the dogs for environmental reasons. Both red and blue shades of government have betrayed our country with their madness, while China continues to dominate. That is someone who worked in the steel industry, Jason in the Lake District, telling us about that. He also says airport expansions across the country are given the green light and saving the steel industry. Surely now the mad rush to get to net zero is a dead duck. Plenty of people getting in touch on 16-year-olds getting the vote. One person says, I certainly wouldn't use Scotland as the barometer for positives of younger people voting. Cliff in Berkshire says, when 16-year-olds get the vote, will they be able to be named if they all criminally vote Labour? Well, it's not criminal to vote Labour. This person says, scrap net zero and we will need our own cheap energy to help our business. Neil says, why on earth was this debate not done over Port Talbot Steelworks? Oh, because it's in Wales, and Wales is the test tube for this Communist Party in charge. Dan in Kent says, so the government are recalling Parliament to debate subsidising 700,000 that the steel industry loses thanks to net zero. It's £700,000 a day that the company running Scunthorpe says that, running the steelworks in Scunthorpe, says it is losing. But it's not a crisis to pay £3 million a day on hotels for illegal migrants. The focus is all wrong, says Dan. And Sue has been in touch on 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds getting the vote. Sue in West Sussex says the vast majority of 16 and 17-year-olds attend school and college. They live with their parents who do not pay any taxes. They don't have enough life experience either to have enough political knowledge to vote, says Sue. Lots of debates happening. You can get your voice on the air as well. We're on till 12:30. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. In just a few minutes' time after the news, we're going to talk about hopes of a new deal with America. Also, Iran denies that it's having direct talks with the United States over nuclear programs. We're going to talk to an organisation called United Against Nuclear Iran. Unsurprisingly, we don't have someone on who thinks Iran should have nuclear weapons. I'll let you decide why. Stay with us.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino? Blimey.
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like something out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, believe it, Dad, just put your foot down, Dad, we're in a field. Put your foot down, this rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet, and it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its two front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich, don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. Is an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the Magpie, which is much bigger, every spring.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. There's loads happening today. It's a really busy Saturday. Parliament is in session at this moment in a rare Saturday sitting. They're talking about British Steel. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about a possible deal with America on trade. What's going to happen there? How's that going to affect every single person in this country in terms of how much the pound in your pocket is worth? There's so many people who are really struggling at the moment. We'll go down to Parliament and take little bits of what's going on there as well. Debate raging in Parliament about whether Labour should have more power in regard to British Steel. We'll take your calls as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Get your voice on the air between now and 12:30. Loads to discuss, and the numbers to call, the numbers to dial, 0344 499 1000 for voice notes if you want to send them through WhatsApp. Less than a minute, please, if you would, so everybody gets an equal chance to get on the air. You can also ring me on that number. You can text me 87222 with the word Talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, and as I say, that main number does 3 things. You can send me a voice note, you can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, as I say, 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss here on Talk. Stay with us. Well, Daisy Cooper is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats. She is on her feet at the moment in Parliament talking about the steel issue. Oh, she's just sat down, so we're not going to hear from Daisy Cooper, unfortunately, but she was speaking on this. We've heard from Jonathan Reynolds, who is the leader of the Business Secretary. He's the Business Secretary of the Labour Government. Daisy Cooper back on her feet, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
For £1 entering insolvency and the government's insolvency service being temporarily running the firm all happens in 2019. Mr. Speaker, with Putin's barbaric war in Europe and Donald Trump's disastrous tariffs causing economic turmoil around the world, we must secure the future of steel production here at home. We Liberal Democrats welcome the sense of seriousness and urgency shown by the government in recalling Parliament. We must work together to rescue our steel sector and the tens of thousands of jobs that rely on it, directly and indirectly. But under the terms of this bill, the Secretary of State is giving himself huge and unconstrained powers which could set a very dangerous precedent. I urge the Secretary of State, in the strongest possible terms, to make a simple commitment today that the powers that he is giving himself will be repealed as soon as possible, within 6 months at the latest, and if they are still required after that, whether he will come back to this House to ask for another vote if he wants to extend them.
OK, that's Daisy Cooper there, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats. Not just her, actually, but also Ian Duncan Smith, the former leader of the Conservatives, quite worried about how much power the government is taking today. Jonathan Reynolds continuing that debate. He's the he is the business secretary. He's the business secretary in the government, of course, Labour government, and quite a few people worried about the amount of power. Ian Duncan Smith, Daisy Cooper saying that it should be curbed. There should be some sort of clause in this bill that says that it only lasts a certain amount of time. Quite a few people getting in touch on steel. Taff and Dover says Reynolds said that the budget was a help to British Steel. How much will national insurance on the employer cost British Steel, says Taff. They should be recalling Parliament, says Michelle, for the migrant crisis. I guess nobody is talking about the grooming gangs now. Shenanigans, says Michelle. And Neil says Shamima Begum, at nearly 16, did not know what she was doing. 2 months later, with this new idea, she could vote. It's just communist Labour trying to stay in power, says Neil. And quite a few people in touch about all sorts of issues, including Howard, who says, great show as usual, the parents arrested for removing a child's tablet. What would my mum be charged for when being sent to my room with no dinner back in the day, for being out of order for something I said deservedly? So, well, Howard, it's a very, very good question. And Neil has said, no one has raised the question why in the first place was British Steel allowed to be sold to a communist country. That is the insanity, says Neil. Well, the whole issue of trade, where we are with China, where we are with the United States, that's a big, big issue, as is what America is doing and what President Trump says is happening in regard to Iran at the moment. Very, very interesting one, because the US may already be in recession. That's according to a huge investment firm called BlackRock, one of the biggest investment firms in the world. China having a trade war with America, we're going to talk about as well. But just before we go to Steve Gill, who's a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, I want to talk to Dan Roth for a second. He's research director at the United Against Nuclear Iran organisation. Iran denying that there are direct talks with the United States over its nuclear programme, but Donald Trump says the US is having direct talks with Iran, stating Iran will be in great danger if the negotiations fail. It'll go on Saturday, today, that Donald Trump said we have a very big meeting and we'll see what will happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable. He said at almost the highest level there would be a meeting, but he didn't say at exactly who would be taking part. He also said hopefully those talks will be successful. It wouldn't be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen. He said Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and if talks aren't successful, I actually think it will be a very bad day for Iran. Dan, thanks for joining us. What do you think is going on here?
Hello, Peter. Thanks for having me. Well, I think President Trump, he wants to give this the best shot he can. He is the ultimate deal maker, the art of the deal author. The two sides, though, are so far apart. I'm very skeptical about the ultimate prospects for such a deal. Iran has never given any indication that it's willing to give up its nuclear program. Obviously, that includes its weapons, despite what its propaganda says. Whereas President Trump, stretching back a long time, even back from 2015, has said that that old deal was bad. He wanted a much better deal. And he's very, very well aware of how radical this regime is. And, this is something that successive presidents, in fact, successive administrations going back from the start of the founding of the Islamic Republic have agreed on. Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. That hasn't changed. This deal, as I say, there's such a huge gap between the sides. I'm very skeptical, but the president, in his capacity as the deal maker in chief, wants to give it the best shot.
And it's interesting, previously, Obama's deal with Iran was something that Trump really railed against. What do you think a deal that would be palatable for Donald Trump and indeed Congress would actually look like?
Yeah, I think President Trump has been pretty clear on this. He said that it requires ultimately the complete dismantlement, something along the Libya model. And that means, inspectors going in, probably Americans actually going in, actually withdrawing all this enriched uranium, transferring it to another country, ensuring that Iran can have zero enrichment. That was always the big international red line, and that turned to pink, as you allude to, under the Obama deal. Iran was allowed to enrich to 3.65% or 3.75%. As you know, it's now enriching to 60%. which is a short step from the 90% needed for full weaponization. So yes, he railed against the deal. I think he was right to do that. He wants a better deal, but I don't know. I'm skeptical.
Okay. Dan, thank you. That's Dan Roth there. He's the research director at the United Against Nuclear Iran organisation. Let's speak to Steve Gill. He's a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. Steve, how clear and how strong do you think Donald Trump can be on Iran? Is it a priority? And do you think this meeting is actually happening?
I think he has to be very strong. They cannot be allowed to get not just nuclear capacity to develop weapons, but also the delivery systems that would allow them to not only strike Europe, but to potentially strike the U.S. I do think talks are underway. It's kind of like when you have a Premier League soccer team and they're trying to get a new coach. They all deny that they're talking to anybody, but they are behind the scenes. So they are talking behind the scenes. But I don't think it's likely, as your guest just pointed out, that they get any quick resolution to this. There is certainly a desire by most of the world to make sure that Iran is not nuclear armed. And in the past, when Israel or others have taken out the nuclear capacity or the development in Iran, nobody in the Middle East has objected. I mean, Saudi Arabia and others, they've all sat silent when they've dropped the big bombs on there or had aggressive military action, because nobody in that area wants an armed Iran. Part of the problem, Peter, is that the Biden administration not only didn't do much to stop them, they didn't really impose or at least enforce the sanctions that would have kept Iran from continuing to develop the resources with their oil sales. They were supposed to be capped at about $60 billion a year. They were sending 200, 300 billion a year in oil resources around. So, the world was funding Iran's weapon development, that they were supporting terrorists around the world and also developing their own nuclear capacity.
I want to ask you a little bit about steel, Steve, actually, because TAD has been in touch and said, I'll tell you why Iran shouldn't have a nuclear bomb. Their threshold is far too low, one minor slight against the Islamic system, and they'd use it, says TAD. John also says Donald Trump's policies for the steel industry have centred on protectionism, primarily through tariffs and trade restrictions to bolster domestic production. I have no problem with a president who wants to put his own country first. Many people would argue, as I would on some occasions, not every occasion, that Keir Starmer doesn't put this country first. But I wonder, in regard to the tariff row, in regard to where we are, has the special relationship done us any good at all, Steve? Because we're still sitting at 10% tariffs.
Well, first of all, I think Keir Starmer does put illegal immigration first. He's just not putting the development of steel production and other business interests enough to make Britain great again. He's recalled Parliament today,
Steve. He's recalled Parliament today.
I think Daisy was right. I think she's trying to argue we need to make Britain great again by bringing the steel industry home.
I'd be very surprised if any Liberal Democrat ever says that, but there we are.
I think the key is, you have certain industries that you have to protect, and steel is certainly one of them, particularly if you're going to have a military industrial complex. If you're going to have a manufacturing base, you've got to find ways to develop your energy capacity. And I think those are the things that Donald Trump is certainly doing here. And in part, when we see oil prices dropping to $60, $62 a barrel, that's going to help the economy worldwide, because it's not just the energy used to drive our cars, but oil is also important in the manufacturing process, the goods we make. So again, I think that the actions that Donald Trump is taking will ultimately, and probably not very delayed, help the economy everywhere. I do think that the special relationship between the UK and Britain will produce a deal very quickly. The trade imbalance between the US and the UK, I think we import about $70 billion or so. We export about $80 billion to UK. So there's not a big trade imbalance. The real issue is in services. And I think that the real negotiation that's going on now is the digital services tax that Britain imposes that has an impact on the big AI companies and the big tech companies. Will that be reduced? I think the talk about free speech in England being a trade issue is a bit odd. I mean, y'all don't have the First Amendment to the Constitution that requires free speech.
We're supposed to have free speech, though. I mean, J.D. Vance bring that up. I do love it when people say, "Oh, these Americans meddling in our country." It's like, I mean, what are we doing in Ukraine? I mean, we loads of people have views on Trump, for example. Labour sent 100 different people over to campaign for Kamala Harris. For example, we talked about it, Steve. So I do think you're allowed to have opinion. I have opinions on Iran. I've expressed them in the last 15 minutes. You're allowed to have an opinion on another country, even if you're Vice President of the United States or indeed President.
But when you've got people being arrested in England or threatened with arrest for what they post on online,
or what they say on channels like this one, for example, I was threatened with arrest the other day.
Well, that's why I can't come see you very soon right now, Peter. All the things I said. The bottom line is that you can't do that and still, uphold the cultural foundations of Britain, of being a place where democracy works, because you have to have free speech for democracy to actually work. And I think that's what J.D. Vance and others are pointing out. I've just never seen it tied to trade issues, and I think that's what makes it a bit odd.
Yeah. Steve, thank you. Appreciate your thoughts there. Steve Gill, former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. Lots of people, speaking of democracy and free speech, lots of people getting in touch on votes at 16. I wouldn't worry too much about the 16-year-olds getting the vote, says Tony. Unless they can vote online, they won't do it. After all, most of them can't be bothered even to make the trip to a chip shop, let alone a polling station. Tony, as you and I both know, and in Bournemouth, I'm sure there are lots of very good fish and chip shops. It's always worth making the trip to a fish and chip shop. Lynn in Glasgow says 16-year-olds should be able to vote. In Scotland, they can get married, leave school and have children, which are more life impactful than a vote for politicians. I mean, you can't have children under 16. I just wouldn't recommend it. Also, a vote is generally every 4 years. So by the time the vote comes along today, 16-year-olds will be 20. So have the vote for 2 years on paper, but still not be able to use it until they are 20. Shane has been in touch from Sydney. Hello, Shane. Good to hear from you. G'day, Pete. I don't think I would have wanted to have the voting age at 16. In 1976, I turned 18 and I forgot to vote. As you know, it's compulsory to vote in Australia, or you get your name crossed off down here in Australia. Well, I was fined. I can't remember how much the fine was, but for a young bloke, it was enough, says Shane. Yes, any fine is enough at that stage. Do you know what? Speaking of fines, I just had the best experience. One of the best experiences of my life, actually, when I was in a car when I was 17 years old, and there was this very arrogant boy who I was at school with. And we all, automatically put our seatbelts on, just didn't even think about it, just did it. And we were in a friend's car, a friend who'd passed her driving test, was driving her dad's car. He didn't put his seatbelt on. And I said, Andy, are you not putting your seatbelt on? He went, I don't need a seatbelt, I'm fine. Just thought, okay, fair enough. And literally, we were about 100 yards down the road. The police stopped us and he got an £80 fine for not wearing his seatbelt. So, as we say in Northern Ireland, slap it up, you Andy. I can't remember, Shane says how much the fine was, but it was enough. Thanks, mate. Say hello to Jack. Well, Shane, that's very kind. I will say hello to Jack the cat. And Howard says, I can't abide this Labour government, but how do the Tories have the gall to challenge them on energy and British steel and other manufacturing? They destroyed it in the UK. Well, we will continue to keep an eye on Parliament. We'll take your calls as well. Keep your messages coming in as well. We've got some voice notes coming up in just a second here on Talk.
appears this is a loss-making industry, but it is crucial for our economic and actually our structural integrity in this country, literally structural integrity.
Yeah, and overall national security. We cannot be wholly dependent on other people, and we as a country cannot be wholly dependent on other people for something as crucial as this very, sort of pure steel, particularly at a time, as you say, when the government says it wants to, sort of build, be it homes, be it investing more in infrastructure.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Peter Duckworth on Twitter says, another British leyland, a sinkhole for taxpayers' cash. You can't make steel when you have to import all the raw materials and use the most expensive electricity in the world. Dave in Reading says, you can join the army at 16, but you can't go into action till you're 18. So voting at 16 will that mean these youngsters can go into action? Says Dave in Reading. Mick in Wallington, if millions of UK voters signed a petition to the King demanding this Parliament be dissolved, he would have great problems by ignoring it. Leslie says, Labour can't even organise refuse collection in Birmingham, let alone deal with the Scunthorpe Steel deal. What could go wrong? And another person says the people of Birmingham should stop paying their council tax if it's not sorted. Well, we can't obviously advocate not following the law, but I think a lot of people will have sympathy with that. Let's play a couple of voice notes. First of all, Matt in Hove.
Peter, Matt in Hove here. I'm just listening to Jonathan Reynolds in Parliament now with my head in my hands. We're a laughing stock. The business secretary talking about effectively becoming a company director of a huge private sector company. He has no experience. He's never run his own business. He's never even worked in anyone else's business in the private sector. We're a laughing stock, man. Why can't we have serious people in these positions? Honestly, we are completely finished. I'll give up.
Well, thank you for your thoughts there, Matt. Karen's also been in touch with the recall of Parliament. This is what Karen has to say.
Hi, Peter. Watching this debacle in Parliament is quite comical. Who would have thought it was a good idea to sell to the Chinese anyway? We all knew they were going to run it down because, God forbid, they ever want to attack us in the future. We won't be able to make any bombs, will we, or anything? But I also think this is a bit of a sideline from the other issues that are facing this country, like the drop of the rape gang inquiries. And I don't think we should be dropping that. We need to push, but selling your steel, British steel, to the Chinese, is that a good idea? Absolutely not.
I think a lot of people will agree with you, Karen. Let's hear a quick one from Joan, and then we're going to go to James in London. Let's go to Joan now.
Hi, Peter Cardwell. I think James is wrong because children who leave school and start working do not pay tax until they've earned a certain amount of money. So that's one strike against him.
Joan, you're right, you've got to earn a certain amount of money, but I think if James was in full-time work, perhaps at that stage, he would have paid at least some tax anyway. But Joan, thank you so much for your thoughts. James is in London and has given me a ring. James, we literally have about a minute for your points on steel. Go ahead.
Right, Peter. I'd just like to say, make a point here, because when the Welsh steel industry was decimated down in Port Talbot with thousands of job losses, Labour, when Plaid Cymru asked them to go and help them out, said it was a pipe dream. They couldn't help. But when it's up in Scunthorpe and up in England, they recall Parliament. So really, it's not a United Kingdom, it's just England.
I think a lot of people will agree with that, James. I think a lot of people will be as frustrated as you are by this. Thanks for that, and thanks for making your point so briefly and succinctly. Parliament continues. We'll bring you all the fallout and all the reaction to that, of course, tomorrow on my programme between 10 and 1 here on Talk. For the meantime, I'd like to thank the top team behind the glass, Judy McGowan, who has been the producer today, Tommy Bateson, the assistant producer, Dave Rhodes, Tech Up Dave, the technical operator, unsurprisingly, and Luke Vincent and Davis Fang have been the visual producers. Major thanks to Davis, who's back from Australia for the Tim Tams as well, a special edition. He's given us another type of biscuits we're having tomorrow. Just a shame that Phil Dave, who is of course the weekend editor, axed the the biscuit breakdown, well, listen, he'll live to regret that. Gazem Hilaj has been the video editor, Luke Vincent and David Davis, as I said, the visual producers, Phil Dave, the weekend editor, and Chris Jacobs was the setup producer for today as well. So thank you to everybody who has contributed. Sorry if you haven't got your point across on the programme today. You can always try again tomorrow. I'm on between 10 and 1. Lots to discuss tomorrow. There is a major change happening in Parliament as we speak, and we will make sure that we get all the information from there. You can join TalkSport now. You can stay with us on YouTube or your connected device for the Talk presenters. Stay with us here on Talk.
We've just been talking in the office here about how many of us have been attacked at some point or other by some form of flying beast or any wildlife. I mean, so we'll take your stories this morning.
Hello, this story is concerning wildlife. It's concerning a rhino.
A rhino? Blimey.
Right? Yeah,
okay.
rhino. I used to live in Kenya when I was about 5 or 6 years old.
Okay.
And we were in this wildlife park in a grey Morris Minor. This rhino started chasing us. There's me and my sister in the back seat.
Right.
It was like someone out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
We were turning around saying, "Believe it, Dad. Just put your foot down, Dad. We're in a field. Put your foot down." This rhino was chasing us.
One from Mark here in Derby. Went on holiday for our first romantic holiday to Tunisia years ago. Decided to take my girl into a petting zoo. I got a bag of food to feed the animals. A giant goat then went for me, putting its front legs over my shoulders and proceeding to headbutt me over a fence into one of the pens, covering me in the food and making my nose bleed. I got out of the pen, then the goat and all his mates attacked me again, sending me running and screaming like a girl out of the zoo, with my girlfriend rolling with laughter on the floor.
A tarantula climbed up the bottom of the bed on the sheet.
Yeah.
And it walked all the way up. It's eyeball to eyeball.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to do when it climbs over my face? But then a miracle happened. It raised its 2 front legs and waved them around. And then it turned around and walked down the side of the sheet.
Boris Johnson been attacked by an ostrich. The former PM was enjoying a safari trip with his family when the bird leaned into his car and went oi oi and pecked his hand. In footage shared online, he quickly jerked from the ostrich, don't dirty minds away from the ostrich, and shouted, "Oh, Christ, get hell," before driving off. And so I just set it out there. Have you been attacked by an animal? When I was about 7, says Trevor Jenkins, on holiday in Spain in the 70s, a monkey pulled my long hair. It was long because it was the 70s. I was in floods of tears. And as the family car drove out the car park, an elephant ripped off the car mirror. We got the message. Spanish animals aren't to be trusted. Jeremy, Brittany here from the United States. I was spurred by a rooster in my right foot a few years ago. Spurred? How do you get spurred by a rooster?
One here from Dan in Hampshire. Morning, Mike. As an Aussie that has been dive-bombed by our version of the magpie, which is much bigger, every springtime, the folk in this village need to use the old Aussie trick to stop being swooped. You have to wear an ice cream tub on your head with eyes drawn on the back so they think you're watching them. True story.